The sun burned low over the Wyoming plains, spilling gold across the rugged edge of Promise Creek, as Ruby Lane held her father's letter tight in both hands. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The words blurred in her eyes, words that would change everything she thought she knew. At 22, she'd sworn never to return to this dust-bitten land after 5 years in Boston's polished halls. But her father's sudden death had pulled her back like gravity to the only place that had ever truly been home. The stagecoach rocked and jolted over another rut, nearly throwing her forward. It was 1875, and the road west hadn't gotten any kinder. Her fellow passengers, a kindly missionary couple, and a stiff businessman, sat silent, each trapped in their own thoughts, as the horses pounded toward the Promise Creek station. 10-minute stop, the driver hollered over the racket of wheels and wood. Ruby straightened her travel dress, once a deep Boston navy, now dulled by miles of trail dust. Through the smudged glass, she searched for a familiar face, her father's, weathered and warm. But instead her breath caught at the sight of a man leaning against the hitching post. Wade Cross. The boy she'd left behind had turned into something far more formidable. Broader now, with sun-roughened skin and a leather vest that looked molded to his frame. A faint beard shadowed his jaw, and his eyes, those deep, steady blues, met hers through the glass. The ghost of a smile tugged at his lips, one she remembered all too well. Last chance for water before Silverton, the driver, called. The door swung open. Ruby stepped down carefully, her legs stiff, her heart even stiffer. Wade pushed away from the post, his stride slow and sure. "Miss Lane," he greeted, removing his hat. His voice had the rough music of the plains in it. "Mr. Cross," she answered, polite but guarded. Her pulse betrayed her calm. "Your father's lawyer wired ahead," he said quietly. "Said you'd be arriving today." She blinked, trying to steady herself. "I didn't expect a welcoming party," he gave a half smile. "Hardly a party. Just me." For a moment, neither spoke. 5 long years and 1,000 unspoken things stretched between them like a canyon. "I'm sorry about Hank," he finally said, his tone gentler. "He was a good man." Ruby's throat tightened. "Thank you." The telegram didn't say much. Heart gave out. Wade replied softly. "Up on the North Ridge, fixing a fence. I found him myself, brought him home." Her composure wavered. "That means more than I can say." He nodded once, then hesitated. "The ranch. We've been holding it together best we can. Clyde May and I kept the cattle fed." But what she pressed. Wade's eyes darkened. "Jed Crow's been circling, been making offers since before Hank passed. Now he's pushing harder." Ruby lifted her chin. "Mr. Crow will find I'm not so easy to scare." A flicker of admiration crossed Wade's face. "Your father said the same." He glanced toward the driver. "You heading on to Silverton, Num?" "I'm home." "Good," he said simply. "I brought a horse for you." 2 waited nearby, one a sturdy bay, the other a golden palomino with soft eyes. "Unless you'd rather take the freight wagon tomorrow." "I've been on the road a week," she replied with a faint smile. "Another few hours won't kill me." He helped with her luggage, securing her trunk to his pack horse before offering a calloused hand to help her mount. Once on the trail, Ruby stole glances at him, the years folding and unfolding in her mind. They had grown up side by side, neighbors divided only by the creek and their father's barbed wire fences. He'd been her best friend once, until that day by the water, when everything had changed. Your father kept your room as it was, Wade said, breaking the silence. Said you'd be back. He never wrote that Ruby murmured, her voice smaller than she meant it to be. Your father wasn't one for letters, but he read yours, every one of them twice. Her heart ached. He never said. Some things are easier to feel than to write, Wade said quietly. Then, after a pause, there's something you should know before we get there. Ruby braced herself. Go on. After Hank passed, the hands stayed as long as they could. But without wages, he sighed. Most left. Just Eli Boone and Luke Callahan kept things running. Loyal men. Your father thought the world of them. Ruby stared out at the land ahead. The red hills, the low brush, the glint of creek water threading through the valley. How many had left? 300, give or take. We moved them south, better grass, safer from Crow's men. He shot her a look, steady and strong. You've got a fight ahead of you, Ruby. But you're not facing it alone. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, she believed him. Ruby bit her lip, torn between gratitude and worry. I can't let you stretch yourself so thin, Wade. You've got your own ranch to tend. My crew can manage just fine, he said, his voice steady but low. Besides, his tone softened. I made a promise to your father. Before she could ask what kind of promise, their horses topped a hill and the valley opened wide beneath them. The Dobbs Ranch stood waiting, weathered by wind and time, but proud as ever. The two-story house rose above the fields, its porch worn smooth by years of footsteps. Beyond it, the barn bunkhouse and stock sheds dotted the land, with the green of open pasture stretching far toward the mountains. Ruby's heart twisted. It looks smaller than I remember. Everything does when you've been gone a while, Wade replied quietly, his gaze holding more meaning than his words. As they neared the yard, a tall, freckled young man burst from the barn, waving his hat to Miss Lane. We didn't figure you'd make it till tomorrow. Luke Wade greeted with a nod. Where's Eli? Wade asked. Fixing the east fence. Should be back before sundown, Luke said, grinning as he hurried to help Ruby dismount. Your pa would be mighty glad to see you home, ma'am. Ruby smiled faintly. Thank you, Luke. And please, it's just Ruby. You worked summers for my father, didn't you? Yes, ma'am. Miss Ruby. The boy stammered, cheeks reddening. Guess I've grown some since then. That you have. She turned toward Wade, who was already lifting her trunk from the pack horse like it weighed nothing. Let me help, I've got it, he said firmly, hauling it toward the house. Luke, see to the horses. Inside the doorway, Ruby froze. The faint smell of pine oil and old leather hit her like a memory come alive. The same sunlight slanted across the kitchen windows, the same floorboard creaked just inside the door. For a heartbeat, it felt like time had been holding its breath, waiting for her return. Your father kept everything the way you left it, Wade said quietly, setting her trunk down in the entryway. Told me you'd notice if anyone changed a thing. Ruby ran her fingertips along the edge of her mother's old sewing table, her chest tightening. He was right, she murmured. She turned toward Wade. Thank you for watching over this place. I don't know how I could ever repay you. No need, he said, shifting under her gaze. I should get back before dark. Eli and Luke will help you settle in. I'll ride over tomorrow so we can go over what needs doing. As he stepped toward the porch, Ruby felt a pang she hadn't expected. Wade, she called softly. He stopped at the doorway. The promise you made to my father. What was it? He paused a long moment, the evening light carving his features in gold and shadow. Then he looked back at her. To make sure you had a home to come back to, he said simply, and walked out into the fading day. Ruby stood in the quiet, listening until the hoofbeats faded into the distance. Then she drifted toward her father's study. His reading glasses still rested on an open ledger, as though he might return any minute. The sight cracked something open inside her. She sank into his chair, and let the tears come quiet and long overdue. By dawn, the sky blazed clear over Promise Creek. Ruby rose early, trading her city dress for an old riding skirt and a sun-faded blouse she'd found in her wardrobe. After a simple breakfast, biscuits, and coffee Luke had brought from town, she set out to reacquaint herself with the land. The barn door creaked as she entered, and a weathered man in his 50s turned from a stall. "Miss Penny," he said with a grin, using the nickname she hadn't heard since she was little. "Good to have you home," Eli Boone Ruby said warmly, stepping forward to hug him. "I can't thank you enough for staying. Your pa was good to me," Eli said gruffly. Couldn't hand his place to strangers. He hesitated, his tone dropping. "But there's something you ought to know. The McGraw's Crow's men been riding our fences lately, measuring like they're fixin' to claim what ain't theirs." Ruby's expression hardened. Wade mentioned Jed Crow had his eyes on this place. "Buying's not the word I'd use," Eli muttered. "He's dammed up a piece of the creek that feeds your north pasture, claims it's on his side. But your pa always said that water belonged to Dobbs' land." "Do we have the maps?" Ruby asked. "In your pa's study, I reckon," Eli said, frowning. "But paper don't mean much when a man's got more guns than sense. Crow's got money and riders. We got heart, but heart don't water cattle." Ruby straightened steel in her voice. "We'll figure something out. I didn't come back to let anyone take what my father built." The sound of hooves drew their attention. Through the barn door, Wade rode in a wagon trailing behind. A dark-haired woman held the reins. "That'll be Wade and his sister Evelyn Hart," Eli said. "She's been bringing supplies since Hank passed. Good woman." Ruby stepped into the sunlight as they approached. Evelyn jumped down, her smile bright. "Well, I'll be." "Ruby Lane back from the big city. Last time I saw you, you were a kid with a book under one arm and dust on your knees." Ruby laughed. "And you were the one daring us to climb trees we weren't supposed to." "Still am." Evelyn grinned, patting the wagon. "Brought you some proper supplies. Figured Boston didn't teach you how to salt pork or put up peaches." "You figured right," Ruby said, smiling wider than she had in days. "Guess that fancy Boston schooling didn't teach you how to smoke a ham or can peaches," Evelyn Hart teased with a wink. "You guessed right, Ruby," Lane replied with a laugh, shaking her head. Wade Cross stood nearby, arms folded, watching the two women with quiet amusement, before turning to Eli Boone, who leaned against the corral post. "Any sign of the McGraws this morning?" "Not yet," Eli grunted. "But they'll show up sooner or later, same as flies on a carcass." While Evelyn started unloading the wagon, Wade's expression turned serious. "Ruby, I need to show you something." Her brow furrowed. "What's wrong? The cattle?" He shook his head. "Not the herd. It's the water. You should see it yourself." After helping carry supplies inside, Ruby saddled the Palomino mare with Eli's help. The two riders headed north, following the winding course of Promise Creek sunlight glinting off the surface like molten silver. The late June heat shimmered off the rocks as the hills rose around them. "Your father named this creek for a reason," Wade said, reins loose in his hand. "Said it never broke its word. Even in the driest summers, she kept on flowing." Ruby smiled faintly. "I remember. We used to come here when we were kids." He nodded, his gaze distant. "Over there," he said after a while, pointing ahead to where the creek narrowed between two jutting ridges. "That's where we're headed." They dismounted and walked the last stretch, boots crunching over gravel. The soft murmur of water grew louder until they rounded the bend, and Ruby stopped dead in her tracks. A rough dam of logs, rocks, and packed clay cut straight across the creek, diverting most of the water into a newly dug channel heading toward Jed Crow's property. This wasn't here. 3 days ago? Wade muttered, kneeling to inspect the work. Ruby's jaw tightened. "He has no right." The line's been argued over for years, Wade said, straightening. Your father always claimed the creek up to 50 yards beyond this point belonged to him. Crow says the line runs right down the middle. And now that Hank's gone, Ruby finished for him quietly. He thinks I'll sell instead of fight. Wade's expression hardened. Exactly. He's been aching to link his north and south ranges for years, and your land's the last piece in his way. Ruby paced along the edge of the dam, studying the crude structure. If this were torn down, how fast could he rebuild it? Wade lifted a brow. You're thinking of taking it apart. I'm thinking it's blocking my water, she said evenly. A slow grin tugged at his mouth. It'd take them a good day to fix longer if they didn't notice right off. Then we'll tear it down tonight, Ruby said firmly. But first I'll check my father's papers, see if there's any proof of the boundary. As they remounted, Wade looked at her with something like admiration. You've changed, Ruby. Boston left its mark. Boston wasn't kind, she said. I learned to stand my ground, or get trampled. I'm glad you did, he murmured. Then after a pause, he added, There's one more place I'd like to show you if you've got time. She raised an eyebrow, curiosity stirring. Lead the way? They followed the creek deeper into the valley through cottonwoods, whispering in the breeze. At last the trees parted to reveal a quiet clearing, the water widening into a calm pool beside a sun-bleached boulder. Ruby's breath caught. This place, she said softly, dismounting. Wade tied the horses and joined her. How could I forget? We carved our initials here somewhere. He ran his hand along the rock until he found it, WC plus RL, etched inside a crooked heart, weathered, but still visible. Ruby traced it with trembling fingers. 17 feels like another lifetime. Sometimes it feels longer, he said, voice low. Silence settled between them, heavy, familiar, full of everything left unsaid. Ruby had replayed their last day together countless times over the years, his promise to wait, her tearful vow to return. And then came distance letters fading one by one, her father urging her toward a respectable match in Boston. She turned to him. Why bring me here, Wade? His eyes held hers steadily. To remind you some promises don't wash away no matter how much time passes. Before she could answer, the sound of approaching hooves shattered the moment. Wade's hand went to his gun instinctively as 3 riders broke through the trees. The McGraws! What are they doing on my land? Ruby asked sharply. The lead rider, a thick-necked brute with a scarred face, pulled up his horse a few yards away. Well, look what we got here, he drawled. Young Cross and the ranch girl back from Boston and playing cowhands. He tipped his hat mockingly. Name's Zeke Callahan, foreman for Mr. Crow. You're trespassing on my property, Mr. Callahan, Ruby said coolly. Zeke smirked. Now that's where you're wrong, miss. According to Mr. Crow's survey, this here's the line. We're standing on our side, and we've been real generous letting your cattle drink from our creek all these years. Wade's jaw tightened, but Ruby didn't flinch. The air between them thickened with dust sunlight and the quiet promise of a fight yet to come. Wade's fingers brushed the butt of his revolver. That's a mighty creative twist on an old deal, Zeke, he said, voice low. Hank Dobbs and your boss settled this matter years ago. Zeke Callahan grinned like a wolf. Funny thing, Jed Crow remembers it a little different. His gaze shifted to Ruby Lane, his tone slick with false courtesy. Mr. Crow sends his condolences, ma'am. He'd also like to renew his offer to save you the trouble of running a dying ranch all alone. The Dobbs ranch isn't dying, Ruby shot back, her voice sharp as broken glass, and it's not for sale. Zeke tipped his hat lazily. You might want to think that over, Miss Lane. Ranchin's a hard game for a lady on her own. Accidents happen out here, fires rustlers, thirsty cattle. Would be a shame. The threat in his tone was as plain as the dust in the air. Wade stepped forward, his tall frame casting a long shadow. "Careful, Zeke." That almost sounded like a threat. "Just speaking facts." Cross Zeke drawled, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "'Less you're planning to fight her battles for her. Folks say you've been spending a lot of time at the Lane place. People talk." Wade's voice didn't rise. "People always talk. Doesn't make 'em right." The air tightened between them. A few tense seconds passed before Zeke suddenly laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "We'll be on our way, Miss Lane," he said, turning his horse. "But you tell Mr. Crow no is a dangerous word. He ain't a patient man." Dust trailed behind them as the McGraws rode off, leaving silence in their wake. Ruby exhaled slowly, only then realizing how tightly she'd been holding her breath. "Charming man," she muttered. "Dangerous man," Wade corrected. "Mean streak a mile long and loyal as a hound to Crow. We'd best head back." They rode home without another word, the tension of the encounter hanging heavy between them. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had slipped behind the ridge. Inside, Evelyn Hart had supper, laid out warm bread beans and coffee, and Luke Callahan was proudly showing Eli Boone the new hinge he'd fixed on the corral gate. Over the meal, Wade explained what had happened: the dam, the trespass, and Zeke's thinly veiled threats. Eli only nodded grimly. "Crow's been itching for this. Figured a city lady would sell and ride off with his money." "He figured wrong," Ruby said, her voice hard as iron. After lunch, she slipped away to her father's study. Hours later, when the sky turned copper and the shadows stretched long, Wade found her there, surrounded by papers, her hair falling loose as she studied a pile of maps and letters. "Any luck?" he asked from the doorway. Ruby looked up, eyes bright with triumph. "Better than luck," she said, holding up a faded parchment. "The original agreement between my father and Crow, signed, sealed, and witnessed 12 years ago. It states clear as day that the creek from its source to the fork belongs entirely to Dobbs land." Wade crossed the room, scanning the document. "That's something, but Crow will claim there's newer paperwork." Ruby shook her head. "My father documented every conversation they ever had. There were no new deals. Crow tried to renegotiate, but Pa never gave an inch." She tapped another stack of notes. "It's all here." "That'll hold up in town," Wade said. "But paper won't stop Crow from damming your creek again." "No," Ruby agreed, "but it gives us ground to stand on if this turns ugly." Her expression hardened. "About tonight, I've already talked to Eli and Luke. They'll stir up a distraction on Crow's south range while we tear down that dam." Wade's head lifted sharply. "We Olivia's staying here with you. I'll go with the men. I'm coming with you," Ruby said, standing. He frowned. "That's too dangerous, Ruby. It's my land, my water, my fight. I won't let others take the risk for me." Their eyes locked, stubborn will meeting stubborn will, until Wade finally sighed and smiled wryly. "Your father warned me you were hard-headed. He should know," Ruby said, gathering up the important papers. "I got it from him." "We ride after dark," Wade said. "Eli and Luke will move first, raise a ruckus by 9. Once they've got the McGraws running in circles, we'll head for the creek." By nightfall, Ruby had traded her calico dress for dark trousers and a work shirt. She braided her hair tight and tucked it under a hat borrowed from Luke. Evelyn, though uneasy, helped pack tools and a lantern into the saddlebag. "You always were the wild one," Evelyn said with a fond smile. "First to climb trees, first to dare the river." Ruby grinned. Wade was usually right behind me. Sometimes ahead, Evelyn teased softly. "That boy would walk through fire for you." Before Ruby could answer, Wade strode in, dressed in black, a bandana loose around his neck. "Eli and Luke are gone," he said. "We move in 20 minutes." The plan unfolded like clockwork. Under the cover of a starless sky, Ruby and Wade rode in silence, their horses' hooves muffled by dust. In the distance, the sound of cattle stampeding and men shouting marked Eli and Luke's diversion. Lanterns flickered across the Crow property, pulling the McGraws south. "Now," Wade whispered. They tied their horses in a thicket and went to work under the moonlight. Wade wrenched heavy logs, loose muscles straining, while Ruby clawed through the smaller stones and packed earth. Sweat beaded her forehead despite the chill of the night air. Piece by piece, the stolen water began to flow again. Promise Creek, reclaiming its freedom, just like her. "Last one," Wade Cross murmured after nearly an hour of back-breaking work. He wedged his boot against a slick boulder and gripped a heavy log near the base of the dam. "Once I pull this loose, the water'll take care of the rest. Stand back." Ruby Lane climbed to higher ground, her pulse thundering in her ears. Wade strained against the weight until the log cracked free with a deep groan. A roar followed the pent-up current surging forward, tearing through the dam like it had been waiting years for release. The freed creek rushed wildly through its rightful path, moonlight dancing on the water's surface. "We did it." Ruby breathed her voice, half a laugh, half a cry. Wade's grin flashed white in the darkness. "They'll know it was deliberate. Let them," she said, chest rising with defiance. "We've got the papers to prove the land and that water are ours." Without thinking, she grabbed his hand. He squeezed it once, firm and steady. "We should move before the McGraws catch on." They rode home in near silence, avoiding the main trail sticking to the mesquite shadows. The rush of victory sat between them, like an unspoken secret, something that bridged 5 long years of distance more surely than any words could. When they reached the ranch, Evelyn Hart was pacing the porch. Thank God, she exhaled. Eli Boone and Luke Callahan got back 10 minutes ago. No one followed. Inside, the 4 gathered around the worn kitchen table. Ruby poured steaming coffee, her hands still trembling with leftover adrenaline as they swapped stories from the night's mission. Laughter came easier now, relief loosening everyone's shoulders. "Jed Crow ain't gonna take this lying down," Eli warned, finally, the smile fading from his weathered face. "That man's got a mean temper and a long memory." "Let him try," Luke said, chest puffed. "We'll be ready." When the others turned in for the night, Ruby and Wade lingered at the table. The lamplight flickered softly between them, throwing amber light over his sunburned face and quiet eyes. "You were something tonight," Wade said, voice low. Ruby looked down, feeling her cheeks warm. "I only did what needed to be done. Not every woman would wade into a freezing creek at midnight just to tear down a dam on a man like Crow's land," he said, half smiling. "Maybe I'm not every woman," she replied, meeting his gaze. He studied her for a beat, the look in his eyes changing, deepening. "You never were, Ruby." His voice softened. "Do you ever think about that last day before you left for Boston?" The air between them tightened. She could have dodged it, but something about this night, the risk, the defiance, had stripped away her defenses. "I thought about it every day that first year," she admitted quietly. "Then less. But I never forgot." Wade's thumb brushed slow circles across her palm. "I meant what I said that day." She smiled faintly. "We were young." "I'm not anymore," he said, his tone certain. "And neither are you." Before she could answer, the distant thunder of hooves cut through the silence. Wade shot to his feet, crossing to the window in a single stride. "Riders," he said, squinting into the dark. 4, maybe more. Ruby joined him. Lantern light glinted off spurs and rifle barrels as a small group of horsemen approached the house. The one in front, broad-shouldered, pockmarked, she recognized instantly. Zeke Callahan. "Get Eli and Luke," she ordered sharply. "I'll wake Evelyn." Within minutes, the household was armed and ready. Wade posted Eli and Luke outside with rifles, while Ruby and Evelyn took cover inside the older woman gripping a shotgun, Ruby holding her father's old colt. The riders circled once, then stopped. Zeke swung down from his horse boots, hitting the porch boards hard. "Cross," he shouted. "I know you're in there. Come out and face me like a man." Wade glanced at Ruby. "Stay back." Then he stepped outside, calm but coiled tight. "It's the middle of the night, Callahan," he said evenly. "Decent folks are sleeping." "Cut the act," Zeke snarled. "Someone destroyed Mr. Crow's dam tonight. 3 guesses who, and the first 2 don't count. Sounds like a dispute between Crow and whoever owns that creek," Wade answered coolly. "Maybe next time check the records before you steal a river." Zeke's eyes glittered with anger. "Mr. Crow's mighty displeased. Sent me to deliver a message." His gaze flicked toward the doorway. To the lady of the house. Before Wade could stop her, Ruby stepped into the light beside him. "I'm right here, Mr. Callahan. You don't need to shout." Zeke's mouth twisted. "Mr. Crow says his offer stands for 24 hours. After that, it's gone for good, and he can't be held responsible for what happens next." "Is that a threat?" Ruby asked, her voice cool and steady. "Call it neighborly advice," Zeke said, grinning without warmth. "Ranchin's a dangerous business. Accidents happen to folks who don't know their place." Wade shifted, placing himself squarely between them. "You've said your piece. Now get off this land." Zeke's hand dropped to his holster. "Or what cross you plannin' to take on all of us? He won't be alone," came Eli's deep voice from the shadows, his rifle leveled. Luke stepped out on the other side of the house, doing the same. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Zeke let out a harsh laugh and backed away. "No need for bloodshed tonight. But remember 24 hours. He swung into his saddle and spurred his horse. The rest followed, hooves pounding into the distance until the sound faded completely. Inside, the air felt too still. "We need to be ready," Wade said grimly. "Crow won't stop with words." By the first light of dawn, plans were already in motion. Ruby sent Luke riding to town with letters for Pastor Whitlow and her father's lawyer, while Eli saddled up to warn the Promise Creek Council. The fight for Dobbs Ranch and Promise Creek had only just begun. By noon, Wade Cross had sent one of his riders to fetch reinforcements from his own spread, and by the time the sun reached its peak, the Dobbs Ranch looked less like a homestead and more like a frontier fortress. Wagons formed barricades, rifles gleamed in the heat, and 3 ranchers from the Promise Creek Council arrived, each bringing their own men folks who'd also suffered from Jed Crow's greedy reach across the territory. Even Pastor Whitlow, the local lawman, rode out that afternoon, skeptical but willing to witness whatever storm was about to break. By the corral, Ruby watched the men reinforce the fences and set up defensive lines. The heat shimmered around them, dust hanging heavy in the still air. "I never meant to drag anyone else into this," she said softly. Wade turned his jaw tight, but his tone steady. "You didn't bring it here, Ruby. Crow's been spreading rot through this valley for years. It was just waiting on someone with the grit to stand up to him." She met his gaze squarely. "Then we'll stand up to him together." Something flickered in his expression. Something raw and wordless. Together, he echoed quietly. Ruby hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what you said last night. About that day by the creek." She drew in a breath. "I came back to settle my father's affairs, but somewhere along the way I found feelings I thought I'd buried." Wade stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "What kind of feelings? The kind that make me wonder what would have happened if I'd never left," she admitted. "Or if I'd come back sooner." Before he could answer, a shout cut through the air from one of the lookouts. "Riders comin'." At least 20. The quiet moment shattered. They rushed toward the yard. Through field glasses, Wade spotted them, an armed procession led by a silver-haired man on a black stallion. Jed Crow, with Zeke Callahan riding at his side, and a small army of hired guns fanning out behind them. "This ain't good," Eli Boone muttered as he joined them on the porch. "Crow don't ride in himself unless he means to finish something." From the opposite road came the rattle of wheels, the sheriff's wagon flanked by the Boone riders. Pastor Whitlow climbed down, already frowning as the two groups met in the dusty yard. Ruby and Wade stepped forward, but kept their distance. Crow's tailored vest gleamed despite the dust, his gloves spotless, his smile cold. "Miss Lane," he drawled, tipping his hat slightly. "You've sure stirred up a hornet's nest since you came home." "Mr. Crow." Ruby replied evenly, "It seems you've been misinformed about where your land ends and mine begins." "Is that so?" His smile never reached his eyes. "Sheriff, I've brought proper documentation proving that the creek runs through my property." He handed over a rolled parchment. Pastor Whitlow unrolled it, squinting at the fine print. "Looks official enough." "It's a fake," Wade said flatly. "Hank Dobbs and Crow signed an agreement 12 years back. That creek belongs entirely to this ranch." Crow's gaze flicked toward him, sharp as a knife. "Convenient that memory of yours, Cross. Folks might think you've got personal stakes in all this." Ruby stepped forward before Wade could answer. "I have the original document in my father's safe," she said clearly. "Signed, witnessed, and sealed in Silverton. I'll fetch it." Murmurs rippled through the gathered men as she hurried inside. On the porch, Wade caught sight of movement, one of the McGraws slipping off to the side, clutching a tin can. His hand dropped to his revolver. Moments later, Ruby re-emerged with the yellowed paper in her hands, just as shouting broke out. A gunshot split the air. She froze. Outside, one of Crow's men was writhing on the ground, clutching his bleeding arm. Wade stood over him, gun-drawn eyes blazing. Zeke Callahan already had his weapon raised. "Stand down!" the sheriff bellowed. "He was sneaking toward the barn with coal oil," Wade said, his voice tight. "Planned to torch it as a diversion." The sheriff picked up the can from where it had fallen. The smell of oil left no doubt. Crow's face went red, his control slipping. "Sheriff, arrest that man for shooting mine, after you arrest yours for attempted arson," Ruby snapped, stepping down with the document in hand. "And maybe ask why a man needs fire and lies if his claim's legitimate." Pastor Whitlow compared the two parchments side by side. Even from a distance, the difference was obvious. "Mr. Crow," he said slowly, "this paper don't match. And Miss Lane's carries the courthouse seal." Crow's polished composure cracked. "That's an old contract superseded by new arrangements. My father never renegotiated," Ruby said firmly. "He kept every record, every letter, every word you ever said. There was no new deal. You've been trying to steal what doesn't belong to you, and now everyone here sees it." The gathered ranchers muttered in agreement. They'd all been burned by Crow's greed in one way or another. Before tempers could flare further, a lone rider thundered in from the direction of town, Clyde Boone, the banker. His horse lathered, he waved a folded telegram. "Sheriff, Miss Lane," he called breathlessly. "News from the capital." Everyone turned as he read aloud. "Governor Harlan Boone has approved the railroad's route through Promise Creek. They'll be buying land for right-of-way and a station. Mr. Crow, your petition to divert it through your northern property's been denied." A stunned silence fell. Then, like the sun breaking through clouds, realization swept the crowd. Crow's sudden obsession with Ruby's land made perfect sense. The railroad would cut straight through it. Ruby's voice rang out, steady as iron. "That's why you wanted my ranch. Not for water, for profit." Crow's expression turned to stone. "Business is business, Miss Lane," he said coldly. "Not when it's built on lies," Wade shot back. The line had been drawn, and everyone in Promise Creek knew this fight was far from over. "Nothing personal," Pastor Whitlow said, glancing between the two sides, before settling on his decision. "Mr. Crow, I'm ordering you and your men to leave Dobbs Ranch. These documents clearly back Miss Lane's claim to the creek." And as for your wounded man, he nodded toward the would-be arsonist clutching his arm. I'll be looking into this attempted fire setting personally. For a tense moment it seemed Jed Crow might dig in his heels, but calculation flickered in his cold gray eyes. Very well, Sheriff. But this isn't finished. He turned toward Ruby, his tone dripping with warning. The railroad will need that land, Miss Lane. They always find a way to get what they want one way or another. Then they can deal with me directly, Ruby replied, her voice as steady as her stance. Without you meddling in it. Crow's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt signal, and the McGraws wheeled their horses around, retreating in a swirl of dust. The tension began to ease as the gathered ranchers lowered their rifles. Pastor Whitlow exhaled, pulling his hat lower over his brow. Well, he said you two sure stirred up a hornet's nest. But I'll tell you what, it's about time someone stood up to that man. He's had the run of Promise Creek for far too long. He tipped his hat before riding off to prepare his report. As the ranchers dispersed, offering nods and handshakes of support, quiet settled over the yard. The sun dipped low, long shadows stretching across the corral. Ruby and Wade stood side by side watching the last of the riders disappear down the dusty road. A railroad station on Dobbs' land, Wade said softly. That's going to change everything. Ruby nodded, her eyes fixed on the fading light. It could mean a new start, prosperity, security for the future. She paused, then turned to face him, her voice gentler. But that's not the future I'm thinking about right now. Wade's expression softened. No, I'm thinking about another kind, she said quietly. The kind we once talked about down by the creek. Something sparked in Wade's blue eyes, that same quiet flame from years ago. I seem to remember making you a promise that day, he said, his voice low. You did? Ruby murmured, stepping closer. Something about marrying someday. I meant it then, Wade said, his gaze steady. And I mean it still. The next morning dawned clear as glass sunlight spilling over the ridges. Ruby woke early, her heart lighter than it had been in months. For the first time, the ranch felt truly hers, not as a burden, but as a legacy worth fighting for. With a cup of coffee in hand, she stepped onto the porch. Down the trail, a lone rider approached Wade, his coat dusted from the morning ride. He swung down easily, tied his horse to the rail, and met her with that half-smile she knew too well. You're out early, she greeted. Couldn't sleep, admitted, taking off his hat. Too much on my mind. Ruby offered him her coffee. About the future. About promises, he said, meeting her eyes over the rim of the cup. And creeks. Her heart gave a flutter. Wade. Come riding with me, he interrupted gently. There's something I want to show you. Curiosity tugging at her, Ruby agreed. Within half an hour they were riding side by side through the cottonwoods, the morning sun glinting off Promise Creek. She recognized the trail before he said a word. Their place. The clearing opened ahead, the wide boulder still watching over the quiet pool below. Wade helped her down, the sunlight filtering through the leaves like scattered gold. Why here? She asked softly, though her heart already knew. He took her hands in his expression open and unguarded. 5 years ago, right here, I made you a promise. We were young and maybe foolish, but I meant every word. When you left for Boston, I told myself I'd wait, that one day we'd stand here again. Ruby blinked back tears as memories flooded her, his laughter, her tearful goodbye, their carved initials on the rock. Wade's voice was low, rough with emotion. Every time I rode past this spot, I'd stop, just to remember, to feel close to you. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Been carrying this for near 3 years. From it, He drew a delicate gold ring, the diamond catching sunlight. It was my grandmother's. I had it resized, hoping. His eyes locked on hers. Ruby Lane. When you left, we swore we'd marry someday beside this creek. I brought you back here because I believe that day's come. He sank to one knee, still holding her hand. I've loved you since we were kids, though I didn't always know to call it love. These past days proved what I should have known all along. You're the bravest, most stubborn, most beautiful woman I've ever known. He lifted the ring. Will you marry me right here beside Promise Creek? Tears spilled down Ruby's cheeks, her heart swelling with joy. Yes, Wade. Today, tomorrow, whenever you say. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling. Then he rose, pulling her close, and their kiss was slow and full of everything they'd carried through the years, loss, hope, and the kind of love that never stopped waiting. When they finally broke apart, Wade pressed his forehead to hers. I was thinking, he whispered, we could have the wedding right here. Just family, a few friends, maybe Pastor Whitlow to do the honors. Ruby smiled through her tears. Right here beside the creek, she said. Just like we promised. That sounds perfect, Ruby. Lane whispered, her heart too full for anything more. They rode back to the ranch, hand in hand, the sunlight catching on her new ring. The first to hear their news was Evelyn Hart, who cried, laughed, and hugged them both until Ruby could hardly breathe. Then came Eli Boone and Luke Callahan, who slapped Wade on the back with hearty congratulations and teased Ruby about who'd really been running the ranch all along. In the weeks that followed, summer settled deep over the Wyoming frontier. Ruby and Wade Cross worked side by side from dawn till dusk, repairing fences, branding cattle, and shaping a future that finally felt steady beneath their feet. When the railroad company came calling, Ruby handled the meeting herself. The men expected a soft-spoken widow's daughter, not a woman who knew every acre of her father's land. She negotiated with sharp wit and calm authority, securing a right-of-way that promised profit without compromising the ranch's soul. As for Jed Crow, he slunk back into his dealings, his reputation wounded beyond repair after the sheriff's investigation. Word spread fast across Promise Creek that Crow's empire wasn't as untouchable as folks once thought. Other ranchers, spurred by Ruby's quiet courage, began standing up for themselves too. And so on a clear August morning, with wildflowers painting the banks of Promise Creek, Ruby stood once more beside the boulder where young hearts had once carved their initials. Her dress was simple white, tied with blue ribbons, her copper hair tumbling freely beneath a crown of meadow blooms. Wade waited for her near the water's edge, his eyes filled with awe and tenderness. Pastor Whitlow stood between them, Bible in hand, as Eli Boone proudly walked Ruby down the path. The gathered friends and neighbors fell silent as the vows were spoken, plain, heartfelt words that carried on the breeze and over the sound of the creek. When Pastor Whitlow finally said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Wade drew Ruby into his arms and kissed her soft, at first, then sure and full of promise. The small crowd erupted in cheers, hats flying into the air. Mrs. Cross Wade murmured against her ear, his breath warm with laughter. "Mr. Cross," she answered, eyes glistening. "Looks like we finally kept our promise." Hand in hand, they turned toward the waiting horizon as Promise Creek shimmered beside them, its waters running steady and sure, just as they always had. The Wyoming sky stretched endless above, bearing silent witness to two souls who had weathered loss, fought for land and love, and found their forever right where it all began. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you